We have a echo here, but we're welcome
Yeah,
everyone
now
to
you won't.
the Wednesday class that shall not be named. I'll say it again. Welcome everyone to the Wednesday class that shall not be named. We're here. The echo is gone. Okay, got it. And we're so thrilled to be able to study again today. Thank you for letting me have last week off as I was at a really nice conference, which the only one I could really go to. So it was a social justice one, very well worthwhile. So welcome to Paul and Eva and to Arlene, Ron, David, Karen, and Michael. I don't know if Stuart's there somewhere, and Lou. We're going to be continuing the biographies of Israel's founders or Zionism's founders, and not Israel's founders, because a couple of people we talked about didn't live. Most of them didn't live. Chaim Weizmann actually lived all the way to see Israel. Of course, Theodor Herzl didn't, Trumpeldor didn't, Jabotinsky didn't. And so what we're going to do today is talk about the most famous and probably the most important. Certainly, you could debate that Theodor Herzl was the most important because obviously he tossed the first stone over, or the first domino. But in terms of people who will be known for creating the state of Israel, there's one person who is at the top of the list. I think we all know who he is. It's David Ben-Gurion. He was basically the Zionist Israeli leader for 30-ish years, from the mid-30s to the almost mid-60s, with only maybe a 1 or 2 year gap when he took off. He is the man whose vision we remember. He's the man who stood there and pronounced the state of Israel, the first prime minister. And we'll talk about his life, which was obviously very long and fruitful, and ranked as, I think, Time Magazine's 100 most important people of the 20th century. I was number 102. David was 101, so we just missed out, but it was close. I still think I'm more important to few, but I didn't make it. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about his childhood, a little bit about where he came from and what he did. We talked about Theodor Herzl just wanting a Jewish state more for anti-Semitic reasons in terms of, we talked about Trumpeldor, Jabotinsky, who wanted to have more of a military one. We talked about Rav Kook, who kind of brought in the idea of religious Zionism, which was an enigma, was an anathema in many respects until him, although he was not very supportive of the Reform movement, let's not go crazy here, but certainly brought the religious opportunities in Israel. And who else we talked about? Trump, so those are some of those we talked about already. But obviously, the center figure is David Ben-Gurion. Now, Ben-Gurion is one of these people who is almost a Zionist from birth. I mean, he was a Zionist at a young age. What year was he born? He was born in, I have it somewhere, 1886. So he is basically 10-ish years old when Der Judenstaat, Theodor Herzl's great publication, comes out about the founding of a Jewish homeland. And so it infatuates him almost from the beginning. So by the age, by early teens, he is already starting Zionist groups. His father was in many ways supportive. He was a pretty well-connected man in Poland, which was part of Russia at the time. He ensured that his son went to a cheder that taught Hebrew. So he wasn't only learning Yiddish, he was learning modern Hebrew already. So it tells us that you see this Hebrew Zionist vision is already starting in this part of the world, even before Theodor Herzl, who really popularized it. But there's already this idea, we already have Ben Yehuda, who was really the guy who brought back Hebrew into the world. His influence had already been felt. And so by a young age, early teens, he's already thinking about moving to Israel and helping out, after the Kishinev pogrom, of course, that only adds to it. He starts a Zionist group in his hometown. It becomes pretty big very quickly because he's pretty dynamic. He wants to be an engineer. Obviously, it's very expensive, so he goes to Poland. He can't afford it, so he kind of teaches, Hayder, because he's pretty known. Even there, he's working with these Jewish, what we call Workers' Party, because he's already a socialist. But when he gets to Israel, he's going to really become more involved in the idea of working the land. The labor, obviously, party is named because of working the land. While he's in Poland and in bigger cities, he went to Warsaw to study. He is already fighting against the anti-Zionists from the Jewish movement, as we talked about, the Jewish Bund. He talks about how where he grew up, he wasn't promoting the idea of the state of Israel like Theodor Herzl because of anti-Semitism, because the town he came from was a very high percentage of people were Jews, maybe even the majority. So there wasn't a lot of anti-Semitism because you had backup. Like if there was fights, you had as many Jews fighting with you as the other side, and it's a middle of nowhere, so nobody cared about it. So he's not doing it for anti-Semitism, he's doing it more for Zionism. And he's even going to be more interested in this whole idea of working the land. So, he is 20-ish when he moves to Palestine and what we call Aliyah Bet during the early 1900s. And he gets to Jaffa, he goes to Petah Tikva, of course, which is the first new city. And he wants to start working the land. This is what you did. You go to Israel to work the land. What is the problem with working the land? He's never done it before. They didn't own land. They weren't farmers in Russia and Poland. So a very similar issue. He gets to Israel or Palestine and he wants to work the land as a day laborer. And what's the problem? He's not skilled. So are you going to hire a skilled laborer or some kid from Poland who doesn't know what to do? So he is not making a good living. He's struggling. He's getting money from his dad to help him out, which he probably is embarrassed about. So he helps join, he doesn't really start, but join some of these democratic, socialistic working organizations that are starting to prop up to promote Jewish labor force. Just like Joseph Trumpeldor, especially, but even Jabotinsky, what did they want? They got to Palestine, and who was protecting the Jewish settlements? They hire Arab marauders to protect them. And Trumpeldor and later Jabotinsky are saying, why are we hiring them to do this? We should do it ourselves. And this is what David Ben-Gurion is saying about the land. We should be working the land. If we want to work, we should be able to do it. We should learn how to do it and understand. He is not anti-Arab at this time at all. He just thinks that Jews should be working the land, and he wants to create. So he works with trade unions and trying to get people to work with people to get them to strike and make sure, kind of like a Normal Ray type person. Bring in the unionizing it, creating a sense of Jews should be doing it. And he ends up working with some very prominent people. He will become the most prominent, but he's working with Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, who is a very influential member. He's working with Shochat, who's kind of brought him into the movement. Israel Shochat, who was probably at the time much more influential than Ben-Gurion, and working with the labor movements. Zvi becomes a famous writer, becomes president of Israel. So he's writing to his father, talking about this stuff, but it's not going well in terms of his work. So he moves to another place where he's going to get trained to do this, kind of like a pre-Moshav, pre-kibbutz type thing. And it's in the middle of nowhere. And he gets there and he starts learning how to do this. And then he, like Trumpeldor a little bit, says we should be having our own night watchman. And so he is living this life, but he's only in Israel for a couple of years. He's only in Palestine for a couple of years because he has to go back home, because what happens when you're a young person?
Take care of your family.
Take care of the family or go into the military, because you get if you get conscripted and you don't show up, what do they do?
But
If you're conscripted, well, they take you to jail. But if they come to your house and say, we want David, and the father says he's not here, what do? They take the father. I mean, unless there's no men in this household at all, they're taking somebody. So somebody's going to go. So he goes back and to serve, and then he ends up leaving, deserting, and going back to Israel, basically. And so he moves back to Israel, and he joins more of this Poalei Zion, which is a very famous labor organization. He helps write part of the newspapers he's writing, because remember, what does he have that a lot of Jews moving to Israel don't have? And that is fluency in Hebrew. His Hebrew is excellent. And Hebrew, of course, is what some of the Jews want to start in Israel. A lot of them want to do Yiddish, because a lot of them are Eastern European. But some of them, obviously, we could talk about Ben Yehuda, who kind of founded the movement to bring back Hebrew. But some of them, like Ben Gurion, who did speak Yiddish fluently, and Russian, wanted, because in many respects, because of Shochat, wanted to do Hebrew. And so they continue to promote Aliyah, trying to get people to come to Israel. They continue to promote working with Turkey. What do they want from Turkey? This is what a lot of what Chaim Weizmann was doing, purchasing land. So, he's going back and forth to Turkey to try and help in many ways. But then, of course, we all know what happens. The World War I breaks out. So World War I breaks out. And this, of course, is a big deal everywhere. So he was basically in Turkey when this happened. So he gets deported to Egypt, goes to the US, and then tries to get people to promote Zionism with this organization, and tries to get people to fight first on the Ottoman side, because he wants this experience, and he feels like if they win, then obviously they'll have support. And so this is what he does. And then he eventually joins the British Army. He realizes that's what they're going to be doing. The Jews, of course, Trumpeldor, and he joins the British Army. He fights at the end of the war, I believe, in the Jewish Legion, which of course is founded by Trumpeldor. And he gets the experience that is going to be essential when he realized the Ottomans are not going to be supportive, the British are going to win. I don't know what exactly made him switch 100%. But when he got back from the US, that's what he starts to do. And he ends up, not fighting a lot. He has a lot of issues. And so he actually at one point got demoted. Then he gets back to Israel. So he's fought a little bit in the World War I. He does not have this outstanding credential coming from the war. He had gone to the US to promote the founding of a Jewish state, which had been not a success at all. He's still getting funded from his daddy. And, by this time, he's already 30 years old, over 30. So eventually it's hard to believe that this person is going to become the man he's going to be, because he is dedicated to the movement, doing everything. He's well known, but he is not the leader, and he's already in his early 30s. And so eventually gets married, and he's going to be, he meets his wife in America, and he's going to be dedicated to her for his whole life. And then they get back to Israel or Palestine, and then the war's over, and this is really when he starts to sprout. He becomes a very sturgeon, strong member of the labor movement, helping define the Histadrut, which is what it is, which will become the Labor Party. He becomes the general secretary. He promotes working the land, promotes organizing, promotes bringing people from Europe, promotes bringing people from America. He, of course, worked with Chaim Weizmann, who sometimes get along when he did, sometimes he didn't. He worked with people all over to help bring about what we're going to do. He helped A.D. Gordon, who was a very prominent labor leader, start another organization, which joined another, and they end up with Mapai, which is the Zionist Party. Whereas many people were very far on the left, he was kind of the center holding it together in many respects. And when the WZO, the World Zionist Organization, really takes hold and becomes bigger and bigger, it really becomes connected with this labor Zionist party movement. And so in 1935, he becomes the chairman of the Jewish Agency, or of the World Zionist Organization. And he will be this chair, which basically makes him the de facto leader of the Zionist movement in Israel. He'll be the leader all the way from 1935-ish to 1948. And of course, why? Because in 1948, he will become Prime Minister of Israel. So it's during these years where he is meeting with people, working the land, organizing, educating, helping to found in secret little military installations. Obviously, he is the center. He is the centrist, whereas people like Jabotinsky and Begin are much more radical, and you have people who are much more on the left and right. He is kind of the center, and so he is the one who is telling them we cannot go to war with the Muslims. We can't go to war with the British. It is not going to be helpful. And he helped start the Haganah, which is going to become the Israeli Defense Force, which means we can defend ourselves, but we cannot attack and instigate. And this is a very important idea, that we should be working Jews together for the betterment, and not just a policy of attack against those we want to attack or hate, especially the British. He is now, obviously, Jabotinsky and the Irgun and the later Stern Gang become much more aggressive. One of the big divisions between him and these radicals, especially Jabotinsky, is the Peel Commission report. We talked about that, how
I know.
Britain commissioned a Peel Commission report in 1937, and he was supportive. This is the Peel Commission that's going to be used as the basis for the UN partition plan. Part of the land to the Muslims, the majority, part of the land to the Jews. Which part goes to the Jews? The area they have bought mostly from the Ottomans. So it's a lot of the coast and the northern Galilee, but the majority still in the deserts. But majority would still be going to the Muslims. And he was very supportive of it. He thought it was great. Obviously, that plan was never enacted, but Jabotinsky was dead set against it. And this is really what created the final rift between the Haganah and some of these radical groups, especially Jabotinsky. And that rift would remain all the way until 1948, where we'll talk about the incident and what his decision was, that how he united everybody. So during, obviously, the White Paper of 1939, the Arab riots of the late 30s, he's still restrained. But of course, once World War II starts, we all know what's going to happen. Obviously, he's going to be very supportive of the British, even though he's had a lot of issues with the British. He's not supportive of their policies. He's not supportive of attacking them like Jabotinsky, but he's not happy with them. But obviously, there's levels. And the Nazis are a very, very deep threat to everything they work for. So the Haganah obviously supports Britain, and he supports Jews fighting with Britain and later the United States to fight them. He supports going in and sending agents into Europe to try and get Jews into Palestine, which is very difficult, obviously, because of the 1939 White Paper, which said only 15,000 Jews could come to Israel per year. And of course, during a war, it's even harder. But he was dead set against antagonizing Britain during this time period. And he was no holds barred. We need to enter the military. We need to support Britain with every fiber during this war, even as he's, of course, supporting illegal immigration against England, but still, he is very much against it, because the Irgun and the Lehi, which are the two, well, the Lehi is part of the Irgun, but it's like a fighting force of the Irgun. By late 1940s, they're already fighting against the British. They're already attacking the British during World War II, which of course was very much against what Ben Gurion wanted. I mean, he's trying to stop them by force, because of course they do assassinate Lord Moyne, who was a very big moment in the history of Israel when they attack a high official, what I think forgot, he's the British Minister of State, and they actually assassinate him. They'd been assassinating targets already, but after that, what did Ben Gurion do? Is he started giving information to the British about the Irgun. He started ratting them out. He's like, if we attack the British and kill them as they're fighting the Nazis, this is going to be really a terrible thing for us. And so, but then after the war, that stops a little bit. Because after the war's over and Britain is won, America's won, he kind of gets back a little bit, not overtly, but covertly with the Irgun, and starts to work with them with this resistance against the British. Because remember, after World War II, Britain was broke. They were very worried about their presence in the world. They were the most powerful nation in the world, controlled China, India, large chunks of Africa. They had the major navy in the world, connections to Canada, Australia. And after the war, they are broke, and their control over the Middle East, Africa, especially China and India, are all threatened. And so instead of being supportive of the Jews who had supported them during the war, they decide to be supportive of the Muslims who have all the oil and who have the vast majority of people. So they stop allowing Jews to immigrate at all into Israel. And this becomes what they call Aliyah, the illegal, it's basically called the illegal Aliyah in English. And so he is now secretly helping the Irgun, Lehi, and others do all of these things while he's especially sending agents to Europe to help bring people over on the boats. If you ever want to read a really interesting book, you could, after World War II, the Jews who were moving to Palestine, trying to go past this blockade, they were going on any boat they could find. You had Americans and Israelis paying and buying these boats or renting any boat you could find, putting as many people as you could on Europe, and then going into the Mediterranean. And of course, the British stopped most of these boats. Some of them, they put them in intern camps in Israel. Some of them, they put in intern camps in Cyprus, and some of them they send back to Europe. So it becomes a very messy issue for England because the publicity is very bad, because the world hears about the Holocaust, and now Jews are being rounded up and putting in camps in Israel, and Cyprus are being sent back to Europe where they were just all killed. It's one of the few times public opinion was on the side of the Jewish community, and he took very big advantage of it. And even though he was covertly supporting all of these things, the British had kind of figured it out, and they knew that he was kind of doing that. And so one of the famous events, of course, was the King David bombing, where originally he had been in support of it because there was some incriminating evidence that the Haganah had been working with Irgun there. But then when he knew how many people might be killed, he really told the Irgun not to do it. The Irgun carried it out. Almost 100 people were killed, British mostly, but some Jews as well. And so this, of course, gave a lot of bad publicity to the Irgun. But this is what they're doing. This whole time they are building their military, bringing people from Europe, opposing the British, secretly creating plans for what they're going to do if war happens, promoting a partition plan with the UN, meeting with the American president, as Chaim Weizmann did, trying to convince him to support it, meeting with, of course, the leaders in the Soviet Union to convince them to support it. Why? Why would the Soviet Union support the partition plan? Because most of the Jews in Israel are Russian, Polish Jews from Eastern Europe who survived the Holocaust. It wasn't the Russians who killed all these people. It was the Nazis. So these are Russians and Polish Jews who want to create some sort of possibly communistic society. The kibbutz, it's communism at its best. And Russia does not have a foothold in this area. At this time period, the USSR has no connection to the Middle East, not like today. At that time, they had none, and all of a sudden, they don't have access to the Mediterranean, and all of a sudden, if Israel becomes one of a satellite for them, they have access to the Mediterranean, which is a big deal. And so this is all going out. And eventually, of course, the UN brings the partition plan to be voted on. Now, why did the partition plan? What happened was England was setting up, and I think we mentioned this, England is setting up all these satellite countries, Jordan, Syria. They've set up all these places since World War I, and they've had, puppet leaders there. They never did this in Israel because it was too difficult because of the issues there. So they knew the UN would never come to an agreement. It was impossible. There were too many factions. The Muslims were not going to vote for it. Russia wasn't going to vote for it. America wasn't going to vote for it. So they brought it to the UN, very confident that nothing was going to happen, and the UN would just say we couldn't do it. Not realizing that eventually America and the Soviet Union would support it. It would pass. They were shocked like everybody else. In fact, when this happened, they basically gave everything they had, all their weapons, all their forts, to the Muslims living there. They were not happy with the Jews for many reasons. And remember, even though the Jews mainly fought with the British during World War II, but it was, we're talking small numbers of Israelis. There was, 500,000 American Jews fought. So what happens, obviously, is after the partition plan is passed, and remember, this is in November of 1947. It's not till May 14th of 1948 that he is going to declare a country. Now, why does he wait so long? For many reasons. One, on May 15th was the last day they were able to do it. Number two, a lot of Jews didn't want him to declare a country because they feared for all the Jewish people living there. I mean, this was not a strong military as we know today. This was a bunch of, labor union people who had been making secret bullets. This was a lot of Holocaust survivors who had just gotten out of camps. These are people who don't all speak the same language. Remember, all the Jews coming from Europe don't speak Hebrew. Mostly they're speaking, the language, a lot of Yiddish, obviously, but other languages as well. Plus, you got people coming from Muslim countries who do not speak the language either. You don't have a navy, you don't have an air force, you don't have an army. You've got, rebel forces and so if we were living or we were adults, we thought really this was a very careless move because these Muslim countries outnumbered them by a lot, hundreds to one, and they had armies already, and they had everything, and plus England had left everything really in Israel to the Muslims. But obviously, Israel took this time to build the cabinet, to train the army, and most importantly, Ben-Gurion knew that in order to have a country, you had to have a military. And you could not have militaries. And remember, at this time, there were several military forces. The Haganah was, of course, the centrist one, but you had the Irgun. The Lehi had broken off the Irgun because they were not radical enough. And so he ordered that all forces come under his leadership. But of course, he didn't have the legitimacy to do this because the other forces were on their own, and the other forces said no. So what was the famous moment that really, there were other things too, but the famous moment, if you haven't, is the Altolina. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. This is the famous moment when a ship carrying a lot of arms, purchased by a man we all know, by the Irgun. Who's leading the Irgun at this time? Who's the most radical guy? Menachem Begin, obviously. And he's the disciple of Jabotinsky. He brings in a shipment of arms, which are desperate. I mean, Israel's desperate for arms. And Ben-Gurion says it's for us. It's for everybody. And Irgun says it's no, it's for us. Now, by this time, the Haganah is called the IDF, obviously. And so he decides that something radical, because their skirmishes are happening between the Irgun and the Haganah. So what does he do? He doesn't take the arms, he blows it up. He killed a couple of Israelis. They didn't realize they were on the ship. So he blows up this important shipment of arms. He says, you know what, we're going to live or die together. Deal with it. And that was the major moment when solidified him as the leader of everybody. There are others as well. There was, some other revolts here and there. But after this and others, we have the IDF. and it is the military. And on May 14th, 1948, obviously that is not Israel Independence Day, because Israel Independence Day goes by the Hebrew date. So this is when we go to war. Everybody probably has seen the picture of him standing in Tel Aviv with the giant picture of Theodore Herzl behind him. It's instilled in our mind. People go to Israel, it's still there in the way it was. And so people in America, where most of the Jews are now, and Europe, are listening on the radio with expectation, but also fear, because they know what's going to happen. And obviously we go to war. And we can talk about the war later, but I don't want to ruin it for you. But we win. Okay? We win, just in case you're wondering. He is very adept at bringing everybody together. We can talk about later why we won. The reason Israel won is, even though they were outnumbered by so many people, they didn't have the weapons. Is the biggest reason, obviously, was this was a modern group of people who lived in a modern age, and they were fighting people who were from a different age, from the third world, who did not understand modern warfare, modern organization, who didn't work together, who thought they could intimidate. And when you attack with rage, blindly thinking everybody's going to run, and they don't run, and they hold their station, and they're fortified, and they know what to do, and they're organized, and this is how Israel won. Ben-Gurion was directly responsible for this organization. Obviously, he was the man who brought in Mickey Marcus, who was the American colonel, who he brought in, who was a Jewish colonel. He's not as well remembered in Israel today because he was an American, but he was a colonel in the US who was a very good at organizing, and he brought him in, made him the first general in 2,000 years, and he also helped organize. And so there was a lot going on with this idea. Plus, and I forgot to mention, when I told you about the boats coming over from Europe, all these boats coming over from Europe over a period of a year or two, which nobody remembered until about 20 years ago when somebody did research. Who were driving all of those boats? Almost all of those boats were driven by American soldiers who stayed over in World War II, very few of them Jewish. They saw what happened in the camps. The Israelis were sending people over, but the Israelis were not good. Were not mad. They didn't have a navy. They didn't have the expertise to run these disabled ships, to know how many people could fit on them, how to get, and so it was basically these American soldiers, and almost none of them ever set foot in Israel. They go, they get captured. Obviously, Israel is not going to do anything to American soldiers. They send them back to Europe. And then the soldiers go on and drive another boat. And then the Israelis send it back because, they're not going to attack American military, not at this point. England's not going to attack the American military men. It would be silly. So these guys did it, not for fanfare. Most of them died without ever getting credit for it, but there is one book out there that talks about these American guys who gave of their time. Almost none of them. It's really funny because you think it'd be Jewish guys, and there were some, or it'd be Zionist guys, but it wasn't. It was just Navy guys who really wanted to help out.
What's the name of the book?
I just forgot the name. I knew I should have brought it. Let me get the name.
Okay.
American sailors to take Jews to Israel. It's called, and I met the author. I went to talk by him. I'll have to remember. I'll have to look it up. I forgot the book. I have it somewhere, but I think I lent it out.
You could email it.
Oh, maybe at The People on the Beach. I think, is that? Yeah, The People on the Beach, maybe.
Okay, thank
That
you.
may be a newer one. I'll have to. I'm sorry, I can't find the old one. The one that originally came out. I'm sure there's been more and more thorough research since that book. But anyway, I'll look that up. But it's an interesting little tidbit. So we win the war. which is obviously the most important thing, and obviously they had to create their system of government. And so they decide that they're not going to be communists, that they're going to base their design on the British Parliament, which is funny because they've been fighting British Parliament for so long. During his leadership, he's elected the first prime minister. Obviously, they create the party system. 120 seats in Knesset. You need 61 to be in charge. Labor Party will be in charge of the Knesset from 1948 all the way through the last Labor prime minister during this, which was Yitzhak Rabin. And then, of course, Menachem Begin will be the first non-labor unit. So Menachem Begin from 1948 to 1977, I think that's here. So for 30 straight years, he was the opposition party leader almost until he finally got his shot. And then, of course, what happens right away? Only Nixon can go to China. He was the one who made peace with Egypt. So Ben-Gurion becomes prime minister, is really prime minister from the inception of the government till 1964. He takes off a year or two. Moshe Sharett will be over there. There's a little bit of a thing that goes on with the War of the Sinai, so he comes back, and he will be prime minister through 1964, but he'll stay in politics till around 1970. Obviously, he will become famous throughout the world for Operation Magic Carpet and those bringing the Jews living in Muslim lands, welcoming them, bribing the leaders of these countries to let them come. During the war, obviously, how was Israel able to defeat when, America was the first country to recognize Israel, but they weren't selling Israel arms. Where do you get arms? Well, to tell the truth, it wasn't that hard to get arms in 1948 if you had money, because Europe was filled with them. There had been a world war. And so there are munitions and arms everywhere if you have money and are willing, and everybody's broke. So if you're Czechoslovakia or Poland or these countries and you need money and you have arms for World War II, you're going to sell them to people even if you don't support that country. Except for America's never worked in any way with countries we don't like or support. There's never been any underneath connections or solicitations or agreements under the table with countries we don't officially support. That was sarcasm. Everybody does it. Everybody does it. You can blame America for doing it, which is our right, but Israel's been working with Saudi Arabia for 30 years, doing business with them under the table. We all know this. Countries work with countries that, now if you're at war with them and it's treason, that's one thing, but Israel's not at war with European countries. They just don't officially support them. So he is the man who makes sure, you think about finding the Nazis. Now, Israel's a country. Should they go after the Nazis? What's the answer? The answer is Ben-Gurion is like, absolutely not. He is like, we're not doing that. We're not going to spend all this time looking at the past. It's not till somebody finds Adolf Eichmann and Mengelev in the same place that as it's already going on, and he says, okay, we'll do this one. They don't get Mengelev, as we know. They do get Eichmann. He's the only man ever to be killed. Given the death penalty in Israel. So after all of this, after bringing people in, founding a country, helping to found the system of government, creating a system by where you have to work together in ways we don't in America, because you have to have multiple parties working together, because at its height, labor movement's only getting in the 40s. Now, of course, the top movement and top, not labor movement, the Labor Party. Now in Israel, the top party will get maybe 20, 22, 23 seats. Back then, you're getting 40, 45, which is a lot, but you still need 20 more seats. So you have to work often with the other side to get things done. What's going on today? So he is the prime minister until 1964. And then he decides to step down. He chooses Levi Eshkol, who will be the prime minister during the Six-Day War. He has a little bit of an out with Eshkol later, as he had with Sherrod, so he decides to come back. However, he is not elected leader of his party. So he wants to come back. 2 years later, he is not. He's still in Mapai, but he's not elected as the leader. So it's kind of like if Biden steps down as president, decides to run again, and the Democratic Party does not elect him as their representative. That's what happens to Ben Gurion. So he doesn't lose the election to the opposing, he loses it within his party. But he stays with the party and will stay in politics until 1970. Now, one of the interesting things, obviously, about him is, one, he opposed taking the West Bank. He opposed taking he supported taking Jerusalem in, of course, the Independence War, but he was fearful of what might happen in the future if we took the West Bank. And of course, we took in 67 the West Bank, the Sinai, and Golan. Now, he was happy to go to the wall. He was afraid, but he was not as supportive of taking the West Bank, fearing the issues that may happen. He was proven wrong, because there have been no issues in the West Bank or Gaza or Golan since that time. That was also sarcasm. It's a little dark sarcasm, but we all know it's sarcasm. He is also well known today for what happened with the Orthodox, because at this time, there were a couple hundred Orthodox, and there was a fear that Orthodoxy would die, because all of these leaders were secular socialists. And so he's the one who gave the right to the Orthodox to be paid a stipend for their families, for their kids, and that they don't have to pay taxes, they don't serve in the military, they don't have to work, which was fine for a couple hundred. Now we're talking hundreds of thousands and maybe millions. And this is the issue that Israel's facing today. That because it's been taken advantage of, and that was his. But obviously, in 1947, they could never have had an inkling of the issues that they thought Orthodoxy was going to die. And it hasn't, obviously. And in many ways, it's gotten larger and modernized itself in terms of taking advantage of America and Israel. So, again, he also really was a lover of the desert. He lived in Sde Boker, which is a kibbutz in the desert. So he really promoted the idea of settling the desert, which is great because it made the desert bloom, but it also meant there were not as many people settling the Galilee. So it's created some infrastructure issues by not settling a lot of people in the Galilee. But on the other hand, the desert has become, in many ways, very helpful to Israel. But he loved the desert. Obviously, Ben Gurion University is going to be established in Beersheba, which is close to Sde Boker. I'm sure all of us, if we've been to Israel, that we went there. And then he retired, and he only lived a couple more years. So he lived his last years writing his memoirs, working the land, living on Sde Boker, and getting visitors, obviously. He did live to just after the Yom Kippur War, so he felt the threat, the worry. Did that kill him? Who knows? But he did die shortly afterwards, where we ended up winning, but obviously the thought of losing that war and everything falling apart was probably very, very worrisome to him. So any questions? So he would have loved to have moved all the Palestinians into Jordan and all the Gazans out of Gaza in 19. I mean, that would have been something, but he knew that was probably not feasible because Jordan wasn't going to take him and Egypt wasn't going to take him. But I mean, these issues, we know what's going on today. He did not live to see what Israel's become or the peace treaty with Egypt, which is probably the most important moment in Israeli history since the 6-Day War and probably obviously the independence. So he never lived that. So he obviously is universally beloved today. Obviously, when he was living, he wasn't. There's a lot of politics and there was an opposing party the whole time. Ben Gurion and him were not best buddies, obviously, but I think they probably, hopefully, at least respected each other a little bit. Yes, Stuart.
Certainly Ben Gurion was responsible for the current economic problems with the black hats. But over the years, what was his relationship with the strongly Orthodox community? And today, after his death, what does that community think about him? Is he a non-entity, an important character, or an enemy?
My guess is he's nothing, not an entity at all. Now you have to remember, during his lifetime, the Orthodox were not as political like they are today. They kind of stayed to themselves and stayed out of things. It wasn't really to the 70s after his death, really, with the Sephardic parties becoming more established. And as the years went on, you know, these individuals and having all these kids, they started to realize their political power. So during his lifetime, they were not what you would call a strong political entity. So they were kind of staying out of the limelight, staying to the side. They didn't make waves. You did not have the modern Orthodox serving in the military really very much until the 70s and 80s. There was some discrimination, not against the ultra-Orthodox that wouldn't serve, but the modern Orthodox, they felt very discriminated in the military. It wasn't until the 70s and 80s that they started to come in and realize the power they would have if they were in the military, and that the military would allow. Now, today, obviously, it's easier to be probably Orthodox in the military than be a woman. Because now the issues are, so the issues we have today, he never saw really during his lifetime. I don't think, I think it would not have been an issue. I mean, obviously people were upset about, but you know, through the 50s and 60s, the government is supporting everybody because there's no money. And all these people are immigrants from places and their skills don't matter as much. So it's going to take decades for them to really assimilate all of these different groups. So there was, you know, so I think there was probably more anti, you know, North Africa and Middle Eastern Jewish sentiment than anti-Orthodox, because all the leaders had been brought up in this world and they were like what their parents looked like, you know, or their grandparents. This was the old guard that was going to eventually disappear. But you know, Israel was a melting pot and they were trying to assimilate everybody, from people from India to few Americans, to people surviving the Holocaust, to the people getting kicked out of Africa and Middle East, and even Central and South American Jews coming in. So that's really what they're worried about. So there was a lot of issues. So I don't think the Orthodox was the top of the list. Michael.
Yeah, you just said something that really piqued my my curiosity about women being discriminated against in the IDF. Could you elaborate on
I will,
that?
yeah. There's always been discrimination against women in the IDF. You can always say that. However, in many ways, it's been a lot less than you've seen in almost every other country in the world. I mean, women were required to serve. They could serve in the military or in other venues for Israel, but they were required to serve unless you were Orthodox. If you were wife and mother, obviously you probably would get out of it as well. But a lot of women served. A lot of women fought in the War of Independence and fought beforehand with the Yishuv. So there was a lot of respect for women, but there was also a lot of discrimination as to what level you get to. Once the IDF became more organized and more prominent, women weren't always allowed to be fighter pilots, couldn't fight. They were more secretarial. In the modern days, that's changed quite a bit as women have been uplifted. Now, the problem is the ultra-Orthodox and the Orthodox have a lot of power in Israel. They control the government. And so this makes it very difficult women because they now want to control the military. So if you're an ultra-Orthodox, if you're modern Orthodox, you don't take orders from women. That means they will now, whereas before you just dealt with it, now the Army will purposefully not allow a woman to be in charge of that unit. Or not, you don't have to salute a woman if you're a modern Orthodox person in the military. So this is what's going on more and more now. So you hear about it underneath, but you could talk to, go online and read about it. So whereas it was really going better one way, it's now not because of men, but because of the Orthodox men. This whole strange world of women are inferior and I can't take orders from them. In a world that says there is equality. Remember, the Orthodox world, it is, it's supposed to be fair and equal, just different. But we know what that really means. We've seen that time and again. So that's one of the issues that women are facing in the military. And we'll see, because if the ultra-Orthodox and the modern Orthodox continue to remain in power for long periods of time, there's a very good chance less and less women will be in the military, or even permitted, who knows, in the future.
Jerusalem Post, I don't know, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, had a very interesting story about an all-women woman brigade that captured a bunch of Hamas in Gaza. It was a very, it was kind of a neat story. But
it's a neat.
Maybe the first time that it happened.
Yeah, but it's a neat story. But then that just proves the point. A woman brigade with a woman in charge.
Mm-hmm.
You think about the Civil War. You had African Americans, but the African American officers are not ordering around the white officers. This is where the issue is going to be. Does it have to be all women brigades? That's going to be an issue, and it's an issue around the world for various reasons. In Israel right now, it's probably more so because of the religious.
Just as an aside, I'm sorry. I just
no. This is why we're here to ask questions.
Just want to know. This is kind of a tangential thing, but it plays off what you just said. In Walterboro, South Carolina, which, if you don't know, is maybe about 40, 50 miles from here, there was a prisoner of war camp during World War II, Germans, and it also was the site of training black soldiers.
Would you say? Okay, so I lost you for a second. Okay.
Okay, there's also a training facility there for black soldiers, and as it turned out, the prisoners of war had more freedom within the town than the black American soldiers. Just blew my mind.
It's a strange world we live in.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry about that. But it's
no, I think that's very pertinent to this, and we're going to see what's going to happen in Israel. Again, I think the issue with the current government was more a threat than what's going on in Gaza or what's going on in Iran. All right, so we have now finished what we thought we were going to discuss. Do we want to continue on Israeli leaders? Do we want to go into bios of other famous Jews? We talked about doing bios. I have no list now. We've got to come to it. Anybody have any ideas what we want to study next? All right, we can go through the list. I can go through the list of people we had talked about and just start picking people. I'm happy to do that. And I'll send out notes if we want to do that. And then I'll just pick up famous characters. Or do we want to stay with more Israelis? And I could do a few more like Golda Meir, Moshe Dayan, Menachem
Well,
Begin.
that would be interesting.
Yes,
So continue with Israel leaders. So we'll continue.
Yeah,
with
that would be
leaders.
interesting.
yes.
Do you guys have any preference? I mean, for any particular ones? Obviously, you know, Golda Meir is a really interesting. Menachem Begin, obviously, and of course Moshe Dayan. All three of those. You want me to do those three next?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, that
so
would be great. That
we'll
would be
see if we
great.
will do all those three, but we probably won't get to all three of them in one session, so they'll be over two
Right.
sessions. So next week we're going to do, Begin, the three most famous people that were not Ben Gurion, Prost and Ben Gurion,
Influential.
although Begin was influential beforehand, but he became much more later. But probably the three most important leaders in the late 70s to the late 60s, the 70s. I'll put in a little Levi Eshkol. He's not as well known, but you know, he was prime minister during the 6 Day War, so you got to get some credit there. All right, guys, a pleasure. So as what's going on,
Thank you so much.
we have a regular weekend after 27 in a row, intense weekends and weeks. It's President's Day weekend. We have a regular Friday and Saturday, so we hope to see you there. It's still going to be amazing. And then, of course, we have coming up a lot of stuff, including the big Purim masquerade, and then Karen and Stuart. I've talked to the rabbi. He said he's going to write a spiel. If he doesn't, we'll use an old one. If you guys are
okay.
interested, that's why you
Yeah,
haven't heard it,
absolutely.
because we're a little
No,
behind.
absolutely.
It's
No,
what we're,
absolutely.
just to let you know, if you want to be part of the spiel, usually we practice the morning of.
Yep.
However, that morning is actually Purim. And so because it is Purim, the conservative synagogue and us at the Sunday school in the morning are going to do the full Megillah reading. So what we're going to probably have to do is do one practice sometime the week before, because otherwise we'll only have like 30 minutes or so, which probably won't be enough. So
Okay.
I'll let anybody I know, Stuart and Karen are interested in participating. Even if you're not just participating, you should come. We've had great, and we're going to read the whole Megillah that morning. So that should be really interesting since we're doing it, because we have Sunday school that morning, and our Sunday school is both the conservative and the Reform synagogues. So they wanted to do a full reading, which we usually don't do. So that'll be coming up next month. Plus the Purim Masquerade, which is our big fundraiser for the year. And you can come in costume. It's going to be incredible. We're going to have professional people, men dressing as women as characters in the story of Purim. So it'll be a bash to end all bashes. So it is our first fundraiser, not of the year. The only other one we really do is of course, Food Festival. So look forward to that. It's going to be a major party, and it's not a full cut. It's more like what was the masquerades where you wear the mask and you dress up just in suits. It'll be that kind of thing. All right, guys. Thank you very much, David. I'll look forward to seeing you when you get back. Great day. Are you still in England, David?
I am, but I'll be to Savannah soon, so I'll let you know.
Well, it just shows to the international popularity of this program.
Absolutely. Footprints everywhere.
Yes. So we have one person representing the millions in England watching on YouTube. So good day to everybody in England and also Australia, because we're very popular there.
Yeah.
All right, guys, stay safe.
Thank you. See you Saturday.